I'm concerned you use your Indian heritage as a diversity card to shield yourself from criticism about racially or ethnically problematic comments and/or stances that you've made or taken in the past. Is this not opposite but parallel to the stereotype that all people who are white are racist? A claim I don't agree with, and one that I'll concede some of the leftists you disagree with do employ for their purposes.
You might have expected me to stand up and give you 45 minutes of racial invective. So a very good way to test these things is to ask you, have you heard me say anything tonight that you would consider racist? And if not, why would you even raise that term in my connection?
So I will concede to you, I did not hear anything explicitly racist, and I do have to say I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm concerned you use your Indian...
So what is the point of this question in the first place? Bro, these wokies are just trying to throw accusations left, right, and center. Girl, your brain is braining. You should learn to think before you ask a question.
When you talk about critical race theory, which is pretty much going to be teaching kids how to hate each other, how to dislike each other, that's pretty much what it's going to... That's pretty much, I don't care what you say, it's pretty much what it's going to all come down to. You're going to deliberately teach kids, this white kid right here got it better than you because he white? You're going to purposely tell a white kid, oh, the black people are all down and suppressed. How do I have 2 medical degrees if I'm sitting here oppressed? How did I get, first of all, time out, because I only got 5 minutes now, 5 minutes. 2 medical degrees, no mom, no dad in the house, worked my way through college, sat there and hustled my butt off to get through college. You going to tell me somebody that looked like all y'all white folks kept me from doing that? Are you serious? What's sickening about this whole thing is what y'all doing right now is already something I do in my community right now to speak out against stuff, because black folks are getting told by other black folks, oh, you know you ain't gonna be able to do nothing out there in the world because them white folks ain't gonna let you get no, oh, you know you're not gonna be able to do
Yeah, that's just the victim mentality.
The white man gonna keep you down. Well, how did I get where I am right now if some white man kept me down? How am I now directing over folks that look just like you guys in this room right now? How? What kept me down? What oppressed me? I work for myself from off the streets to where I am right now. You gonna sit here and tell me this lie of critical race theory? Of this the reason why black folks can't get ahead because of white folks? Are you kidding me? This is what we come to now. I can't believe we even talking about this right now. The last thing I'm gonna say right here is something that's crazy. Martin Luther King said he wanted his kids to grow up in a world where they are judged by the contents of their what? Their character, not their skin. If they letting this stuff go on right now, it is absolutely doing the complete reverse of what he's doing. So when February comes, don't talk about Martin Luther King. When February comes, don't talk about Black History Month. If y'all gonna sit there and just pretty much pee on his grave with this nonsense, that's exactly what's about to happen. When it all comes down to it, the person that's gonna be suffering from this, the ones gonna be hurt from this, is the kids. 10 years from now, if this stuff goes on, whose fault is it gonna be? Whose fault is it going to be? Who we going to look back on and blame for this? Because this is stuff we're talking about right now. This stuff is going on right now. I do this stuff on a daily basis. I'm in the hood. I'm in the communities. I'm out there with folks in their face. I've been doing this stuff since I was 18 years old, talking to black folks. And you know what? None of them are buying this nonsense. None of them are. But if you want to implement this into the school system, I guarantee you to the day that I die, I'm going to be the very person right there debunking stuff, tearing stuff down, letting them know they can do exactly what I did and get exactly where I am by putting themselves to work and getting there. And ain't not one white person ever gonna keep any of them from getting there.
This man deserves all the credit, because such good mentality like this will always make you take responsibility for yourself all of the time. And the brainwashed do not know that they're brainwashed. And this man just proved it right here.
I have a study with me. It's from the European Society of Endocrinology that has found the brains of transgender people both operate and look more like their desired gender rather than the one that they were assigned at birth. The article states, the pattern of brain activation in both transgender and adolescent boys and girls most closely represented that of non-transgender boys and girls of their desired gender. In addition, GD or gender dysphoria, adolescent girls showed a more male-typical brain activation during a visual spatial memory exercise. Finally, some brain structure changes were detected that were also more similar, not identical, to those typical of the desired gender of GD boys and girls. Dr. Bacher, the doctor conducting the research, says, although more research is needed, we now have evidence that sexual differentiation of the brain differs in young people with GD as they show functional brain characteristics that are typical of their desired gender. So then, Mr. Knowles, as established in the 14th Amendment, everybody is entitled to the legal protections as put forth in the Equal Protections and Due Process Clauses. So the The interpretation of these clauses can be found in Griswold v. Connecticut, Loving v. Virginia, and Obergerville v. Hodges, the landmark cases enshrining the rights to birth control, interracial marriage, and same-sex marriage. So if the 14th Amendment stands correct, these legal bans on transgender care and their existence in general are therefore viciously in violation of the 14th Amendment. These laws are also not neutral nor generally applicable as required to have a law be constitutional. The precedent can be found in the rulings of the Employment Division, Department of Human Resources of Oregon v. Smith.
You know, I fear that I was going to be the only one to give a speech tonight, but I'm glad that I get to attend a speech as well.
I apologize for the longevity. But so then, Mr. Knowles, due to your call for the good of society, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. What do you propose we do? We cannot violate the U.S. Constitution, and seeing as these laws and bills are targeting and are only applicable to approximately 1.2 to 1.8% of people aged 13 to 17 and approximately 0.4 to 0.6% of the ages 18 and above, it is obviously and very clearly not neutral nor generally applicable. So I ask you again, what do you propose we do to address this issue that is not in violation of the Constitution and is humane?
There was a lot there, so let's take it from the top. You premised your question on the suggestion that men who identify as women, they actually have the brains of women, right? And women who identify as men, they actually have the brains of men. So I would ask you,
What kind of point is
could
that?
you tell me a little bit more about the differences in the brains of men and women? How do men and women differ by their brains? Would you say one is a little smarter than the other, you know? One's a little sharper. Or those women, maybe they're a little more emotional. Men, they're a little better at keeping a level head. What would you say is the difference between the male and the female brain?
So some of the research that they've shown is different sizes of different portions of the brain. I don't have the actual facts in front of my face. I simply only have the actual findings of the research.
I raise the question because I think you've unwittingly accepted a premise that is contrary to the liberal point of view and probably to a polite conversation, which is that men and women have these fundamentally different brains. And so if you're saying that men and women are distinct categories and for that reason perhaps we ought to do away with some of the lies of the feminist movement and some of the lies of the homosexual rights movement, that's fine by me. But I think that these claims are a little bit dubious. And it also undermines the premise of transgenderism. The premise of transgenderism is that one's true self is not necessarily dependent upon one's body, so that one's sex is biologically determined, but one's gender expression is not biologically determined. It's socially constructed and can be whatever one wants it to be. But the case that you've just presented for transgenderism is different than that. What you're saying is that actually transgenderism is biologically determined because the brain is an organ of the body. So what you're really claiming is that these men who claim to be women, they just are biologically women. So you're free to pursue more studies on this. The studies that I've seen are pretty scant, pretty weak, and are not particularly persuasive. But sure, you can have all of those studies. It still doesn't address the question of transgenderism, which is what happens when someone wants to identify as a sex that is different from their physical form. And in that issue, then we have to ask the question, can one really do that? And I see no evidence, including even if I believed all of those studies, which I don't, but even if I did, that still wouldn't make an argument for that point. So I think if you're going to argue for the transgender ideology, you have to make the point that identity has nothing to do with the physical body. And that's absurd. And there are plenty of ways to understand the relationship between our metaphysical selves and our physical selves. Hylomorphism is the technical term that describes it. For at least 2,300 years, it's good enough for me, the idea that we're a union of body and soul, that sexual difference derives from the body and is an inseparable accident of the individual that persists as long as the individual exists, but it applies to the whole person because we're a composite of body and soul. That's a reasonable explanation to me, and it's served us very well for the entirety of our civilization. If the transgender movement has a different conception of what the person is, they're free to make the argument, but they haven't. What they do is is they vacillate between mutually contradictory arguments. On the one hand, they'll say that my true self has nothing to do with my body. Then on the other hand, they'll make the argument you just made, which is that my true self is entirely dependent upon my body. And so I think they've got to get their story straight, but I don't think that they can.
Man, I say this again. I don't know what kind of point she was trying to make here. I don't understand why she would even consider this as an argument to begin with. Because apparently anyone can do a research at this point. I can do a research and tell you that sand is the new sugar. But that does not gonna make you put spoons of sands in your coffee. So that's why I said I don't understand why she's making this argument in the first place. And Michael Knowles just dismantled her argument right here. He exposed every flaw in her argument with sharp logic.
Supreme Court of the U.S., who I know we've already talked about, Justice Jackson. Since you're here tonight, though, in the name of fostering intellectual diversity in academic spaces, it would appear to me that you already recognize the importance of new perspectives. And as a young woman, seeing Justice Jackson on the Supreme Court is invigorating, truly. And on Tuesday, it baffled me that you would ask such flagrantly racist questions to this exceedingly well-qualified candidate. Your colleagues in the GOP promised a respectful and dignified hearing for Justice Jackson, and to me, you did not uphold this. So today I wanted to create a space where you might be able to challenge your own thinking, as prudent scholars often do. So I'm here to ask you, what are two nice comments you can give about recent nominee Justice Jackson's judicial experience, besides from she has an easy smile?
Yeah, you racist. What's the comment? There's a lot to praise about Judge Jackson. She is very, very bright. She is very, very accomplished. She is very talented. She has an impressive and inspiring personal story. I will say, sitting listening to her opening remarks, where she described her personal story, she described her parents' journey, you had to be dead not to be inspired by that journey. And listen, I will say more broadly, if you look at the history of our country, if you look at the history of our country on race, it is absolutely inspiring to see an African-American woman serving on the Supreme Court. I will also point out that when it comes to issues of race, I think both the press and the modern left are hypocritical on this question. That they only define someone as black, or they only define someone as Hispanic, if they agree with them ideologically. So, Clarence Thomas has been on the court for decades.
That's a fact.
Clarence Thomas is a black man. The left hates him. They despise Clarence Thomas. And I'll tell you, by the way, the treatment of Clarence Thomas on the left is markedly different than, say, Antonin Scalia. Antonin Scalia was brilliant. He and Justice Thomas were every bit as conservative. And yet, the vitriol that was heaped on Clarence Thomas, nasty, racist language from the left. There was one magazine cover that showed Clarence Thomas as an Uncle Tom sitting at Scalia's feet. I think was racist and disgusting. And listen, I will say this as an Hispanic man. As an Hispanic man, Jorge Ramos went on television in Spanish and described me as a traitor to my race for daring. Okay, look, that says something about the view of the left, that they're telling you you have one way to view things and one way only. And if you don't, we'll demonize and attack you.
His answer just got better and better, and we all know that she stopped listening after he didn't confirm her delusion. Because she just want to play the victim and the righteous one in all of this.
Economic and social equality. I don't know really what that means, but maybe you could tell me.
Interesting, yeah. It means that like all people kind of get the same opportunities.
Like Cuba? Or like Venezuela?
No, not like Cuba or Venezuela.
Or like North Korea?
No, not like...
or like how the Soviet Union did it, right?
No, I'd like you to stop like interrupting me. I think that all those examples of like capitalist systems are ones that aren't...
The Soviet Union was not a capitalist system.
Yes, I know. And Venezuela is not a socialist system.
Sure it is. They nationalized their oil and gas reserves. They have nationalized healthcare, nationalized schooling. The government owns the means of production. How is it not a socialist country?
because because of the history of U.S. interference, socialism cannot be enacted as it should be.
It also sort of functions under the guise of socialism. I think a lot of the power figures
Venezuela is
are
still
corrupt.
corrupt as fuck.
Yeah, can you show me any socialist country that works?
Yeah, most of Europe.
So maybe Norway, Sweden, or Finland?
Yeah.
But they're more economically free than America.
How so?
On the World Economic Freedom Index, they're ranked higher than America.
And so what does that mean?
So lower taxes, less regulation. So they're not, I wouldn't consider them to be socialist countries.
They provide healthcare for all their citizens.
So does Cuba. How does that work?
I'm sure.
Because they're
Norway, Sweden, Finland also has a homogenous population.
Oh, I want to know about this.
Yeah,
Why do you think? Why is that sort of thing promoted?
Because it's 6 to 7 million people.
They don't need a homogenized society.
You don't need it.
But what is? I don't
Yeah,
know.
Because they have low rates of immigration.
Can you explain to me why?
And so they have less people coming in their country every year that need Medicaid equivalent type social programs.
Can you explain to me why?
They have the strictest immigration policies in Europe, in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and they don't pay for a national military. 70 to 80% tax rates for the highest earners, of which I oppose completely. Sweden has full school choice, which I'm sure you support, right?
I don't.
Oh, okay, but Sweden has full school choice.
I mean,
Sweden's also ranked higher on
if
the
all
world.
schools are funded equally, then yeah, I would support school choice. But the fact is that schools in richer areas have better funding and thus give people better education, as opposed to poorer areas, and thus poor people who can't afford to choose that rich school, who can't commute, who can't afford the tuition, are not going to be able to get that level of education.
So why is it that we've spent more on education in the last 60 years federally, but our test scores have gotten worse? Why do you think that is?
Because testing is not a measure of...
How about graduation rates? I mean, any metric you use, our schools have gotten worse over the last 50 years.
So funding
Where have they gotten worse?
I'm sorry?
Where have they gotten?
Baltimore. There are 7 schools in inner city Baltimore where they can't find one kid in 8th grade. Oh, so wait, so do you think America's more racist today than it was in the 1960s?
In some levels, yeah.
Really? You think America's more racist today than it was in the 1960s?
I think
still more racist than it should be.
I mean, yeah, I want to say I think net racist.
I mean,
do you want it to be more racist?
Yeah,
that's what it seems
no, it's not. Actually, I think we're significantly less racist. So you can't blame racism for why these communities are not doing well. No, significantly.
No amount of evidence will ever convince people like this. That you can list all the facts and the data and the statistics, and still their stubborn head wouldn't get it.
Can you be racist to white people?
No.
Why not?
Listen, educate yourself on racism. You cannot be racist to white people.
Yeah, you can actually.
But how? Why?
If you look it up, you'll understand. Cracker.
That's a little racist, don't you think?
It's not racist, there's a difference.
If it was the other way around, then I'm racist.
Yes, because who was enslaved?
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Why are we throwing it back that far?
Who was enslaved?
Man, I can't believe these people.
Have you ever thought, maybe racism isn't real, the higher powers are just controlling and doing that so we fight amongst each other?
I like the way you're thinking, yes.
Be for real.
I'm being for real. I don't believe in it. Why can't we all just be friends?
Cracker.
That's racist.
Listen, racism is racism, regardless of what color the person doing it is. And she's here acting like she was freed from slavery yesterday. Victim mentality, bro.
There is discrimination happening in America right now, legal systemic racism discrimination, but it's not necessarily happening against brown folk. It's happening against Asians and whites on the books. That's why I fought against Prop 16, because for one, those of us with brown skin, we don't need standards lowered. We can meet the standards, so please don't do that to us, okay? And secondly, it creates resentment. When I went and got my 4-year degree and then I went and got my master's, we sat around a room, and this was at UC Santa Cruz, which is like a total liberal, horrible college. And we sat around the room and we shared our GPAs. Mine was the lowest. And there was a white guy that said, "Oh, you got in here because you're a black woman." And I was like, why would you say that? Blah, 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 blah. And now I look back and I'm like, you know what? Maybe it was because of the color of my skin, because they do that now. I actually got a $40,000 scholarship because I'm black. That's not happening for white kids. It's not like you can apply and get a white kid $40,000 scholarship. They would not let that happen. So there is systemic racism in this country, just not the crazy woke liberal college professor systemic racism that's being taught.
It's very rare to see humble people like this looking at all sides of their life first, rather than blaming others for their bad decisions and actions.
One Boston University law professor who specializes in critical race theory, all the rage. One Boston University law professor who specializes in critical race theory, all the rage these days. She said race and racism are basically baked into everything we do in our society. It's embedded in our institutions. It's embedded in our minds and hearts. It's this type of thinking that has produced truly psychotic examples of what's considered white supremacy today. Just to name a few: punctuality, linear thinking, delayed gratification, hard work, credit scores, meritocracy, basic English, basic math. It's gotten so ridiculous that the publication Food and Wine posted an article recently titled, "The difference between yams and sweet potatoes is structural racism." So it's structural racism to confuse yams and sweet potatoes. So don't mix up your root vegetables, you bigots.
Listen, if you're thought that racism is everywhere, then you will see it everywhere. And that is precisely the point. Because this madness is the intended outcome.
There are surely many deserving minorities who would like to come to Amherst but have the inherited disadvantage of American history. Therefore, since you are an acknowledged beneficiary of illicit privilege, would you be willing to step aside voluntarily, putting your own moral mouth where your self-proclaimed virtue is, and give your seat, not my seat. I realize you may be super generous with other people's advantages and favor affirmative action so other white kids who apply to Amherst are turned away to open spaces for minorities. But I'm not talking about you acting out your virtue on them. I'm talking about you acting out your virtue on you. Are you willing to give up your illicit seat that you don't deserve here at Amherst to make room for a disadvantaged minority? Yes or no?
His response to the student questioning white privilege was a mic drop moment. He flipped the narrative, challenging them to live by their standards. And they just left the room stunned.
What I don't understand is why a lot of my own people don't see that the is politicizing us and using us to pass laws that aren't going to actually benefit us. I feel like a lot of us are blind, you know, with as far as speaking English or Spanish. I couldn't imagine going to China and not learning the language. How would I go find where the bathroom is or
any other country on earth?
But I don't think people should not speak the language. They could speak it in their house, but how would they communicate with their neighbors? You know, I'm wondering when being proud to be an American became racist when America doesn't have a race. You know,
I'm wondering exactly the same thing. I think part of that is because you have people, we've now heard from 2 faculty members at this university who have said that if you hold the opinions that you and I hold, that we are fascist, we are racist, and we are committing violence against Latinos. Apparently you're committing violence against Latinos. I didn't know this. You're apparently self-flagellating or something like that. This is an opinion held by 2 white liberal people who are teaching at this university. And I point them out because it creates a culture that stifles free speech. The only thing that we can possibly do is speak up and look them in the eye and convince our neighbors and not allow them to bully us and shut us up. But it looks like nobody's going to bully and shut you up, so that's a very good thing.
The left just exploits communities for political gain, and I think you know that. They're passing laws that don't truly help anything but their ideologies.
We're asking students what they think about the push to change the colonial mascot and to rename the university. You may or may not know there's kind of been a controversy on campus about the colonial mascot. And I was wondering if you think that the colonial mascot is racist, and if so, what should be changed to the mascot?
I don't know. I don't have a huge preference on like what it gets changed to, but it probably should. I think it is something that can be remedied, and if there is a critical mass of people who are insulted by it, and its references and the fact that it brings up a long history of colonialism within the U.S., around the world. So I feel like at that point, the school should have to do something.
I do support the change. I don't really have like a clear, opinionated answer towards it, but I think it's like offensive to. I think it's a strong matter that needs to be addressed.
I think that it has enough associations to things that have been negative in the past to the point where they should have probably changed.
I'd say, yeah, of course I support the change.
And why do you support the change?
I mean, I agree. I feel like the whole question of, like,
what should we do to change history and like what should we do to change our narrative of history is like a huge one today. Like even with the changing of Thanksgiving, like we're recognizing that our story of kind of like America and the glorification of how we came to be should not be glorified. So I think that changing it would obviously include that narrative.
I think that it's kind of a result of everyone's individual experiences. If they change it, great. If they don't, it's whatever.
And do you personally think that the colonial mascot has like racist undertones?
I definitely think there's connotations there that could be harmful to a lot of people's backgrounds.
Like, as like a white person who's mainly benefited from those things throughout history, like it's not my place to say whether or not like the use of the name George Washington is something that's impacting other people, because I don't know.
I know it's pretty controversial, and like if people are, feeling those negative feelings about it, that's valid, and you can't really say that it's not. So I do know people that it has, caused some hurt in their lives, I guess.
I think it's more being aware of what people think and trying to be more respectful of people's opinions. So, if a lot of people are really offensive to the name, then I wouldn't be surprised if they made some initiatives to change the name.
This guy right here is judging everything based on the criteria of racism. I think you should just remove those glasses and see the world without them.
In concert with what you were talking about with equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, when our law enforcement officers arrest African Americans are 5 times more likely to be arrested than white Americans. Isn't that an inequality of opportunity for these people typically living in inner city neighborhoods?
I grew up in the inner city. I could have fallen and gone down the wrong path. And if I go down the wrong path, then I'm responsible for those actions, and there are consequences to those actions. And I would just say to the young black men and women in the inner cities, don't go to the gangs. Don't go down the path of lawlessness. Go down the path of thinking about your future.
Right. You can say that. That's like, I agree with that. But when you talk about like the institutional reality that African Americans are arrested 5 times, they're 5 times more likely to be arrested than white people, isn't there something institutional, not just a choice? Because then we wouldn't have that disparity. Like, where does the disparity come from?
I do not agree with police harassing anybody. And they're just the same as they're bad soldiers, they're bad cops. And bad cops need to be prosecuted, just like what we saw in South Carolina. But I think inherently we have a problem with criminality in our inner city communities. And the real problem, we're just talking about a symptom. The real disease in the inner city communities is the fact that when I was born in 1961, the 2-parent household in the black community was between 75 and 77%. Today it's only 24%. Well, actually, I will tell you it's even deeper than that. You can read about the Great Society programs of Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1965, when he came up with a policy that said if a woman has a child out of wedlock, the government will provide her a check, no matter how many children she has out of wedlock. But there was a caveat: she cannot have a man in the home. You destroyed the black community with that simple policy, because the federal government came in and replaced that which was a foundation in the black community, a strong father. And when you don't have the strong fathers there, not saying that a woman can't raise, young men, but when you don't have that strong father there, you see a lot of the problems that we have in the inner city.
With straightforward honesty, he reminded the young generation of the realities they face, contrasting the rhetoric of left-wing media with practical truths that focuses on personal responsibility and family unity.
Getting called a straight white man.
We're good. And everything's really good. Everything's looking really good. We're in the lowest time of poverty in human history, and poverty is exponentially reducing every year. Trust me, we're in a very good time.
This is really interesting coming from a straight white man.
Well, okay, yes.
Like, everything's always been good for you. I'm a minority.
Yeah.
Nothing's good for me.
I'm Palestinian. I'm Arab.
You're Arab?
Yeah.
Just think about this point. You have everything, like hanging out with your friends, being fully fed, getting new clothes, and getting an education, yet she is the victim. This is only a mental illness. Simple as that.
How do you decide what the nature is?
Well, I'm not deciding what anyone's nature is. I didn't decide what a female is. I just know that there are 2 different categories of being, as I explained. There is no third category. Are you aware of a third category?
No.
Okay, well then it looks like we're in agreement.
No, there's intersex. That's a third category.
Well, no, that's not a third category. That is a variation within a category. That is someone who has a genetic defect or deformity within one of these categories. Intersex person is not a third sex. There's no actual biologist who would tell you that there is a third human sex called intersex. This is a deformity.
It's not a third sex.
But you just said that it was.
No, I'm not saying it's a third sex.
You did say
I'm saying it's neither sex. Yeah, you got me. That is actually a good point.
Okay.
But
look, man. Okay.
It was brutal, wasn't it? How easily this student got ruptured by his speech from any sex to two genders. But at least he's open to recognize that he's wrong.
Everybody knows the quote, what LBJ said. He's all like, oh, we'll have these N-words voting for such and such years or whatever. And after I said that, she just said, oh, disregard that. They're still for the black people or whatever. They're still for us or whatever. So basically what my question is how are we going to get the truth out there? How are we going to make sure that everybody's like staying in line with the truth? How are we going to make sure that the information that everybody's getting is veritable and fact checked? Because we have people out here that don't necessarily follow the facts. They don't necessarily believe in things based on reality. So how are we going to get that going?
The key is dispelling this leftist premise that conservatives hate black people and brown people and Hispanic people and every kind of people other than like Mitt Romney, basically. Other, you know, like just the whitest imaginable guy. You have to dispel that first, because I'm sure you were making many eloquent arguments about how leftist policies have really wreaked havoc in the black community, and Thomas Sowell has written extensively on this topic. Thomas Sowell, one of the greats of modern times, and he's written extensively about how until those massive welfare programs of the 60s and 70s, until then, in the black community, murder rates were going down, crime rates were going down, out-of-wedlock birth was going down, divorce was going down, poverty was going down. And then, as if all of a sudden during that cultural revolution of the 60s, all the trend lines reversed. And so what the left would say is, forget about all of that. We, the leftists, like black people, and those mean conservatives hate you because of the color of your skin. And that's an argument based on identity, but it's a very strong argument. You know, I mean, if I really were to believe that some group of people hated my guts, then it wouldn't matter too much how much they lowered my taxes or fixed some problems in my neighborhoods, because I don't want to elect people who hate me. Now, the reality, of course, is that conservatives do not hate black people or anybody else. There's no, and you could make an argument for racial prejudices on the left. What Mr. Gerson referred to as the soft bigotry of low expectations, to say we will never expect certain social standards from you because you're just not capable of it on the basis of your skin. And that's a horrifically bigoted point of view, and it's one that the left holds. I think you've got to make the argument first from compassion, from dispelling this myth that the left is compassionate. It's not. There's nothing compassionate about getting people stuck in generational webs of government dependence, living in absolute abject misery and squalor, and hooked on welfare payments, and hooked in bad schools that they're not allowed to break out of. I mean, even just on that one issue of school choice, for so many people, getting into a good school can radically change your life outcomes. It is the best shot you have of getting out of poverty and of having not only a materially prosperous life, but a spiritually and culturally prosperous life too. And you have the left, especially in inner cities, saying we're going to lock you and trap you in failing schools where you'll learn nothing and you'll very likely join a gang. And you have conservatives going out there and saying, we need school choice, we need to encourage vouchers, we need to encourage charter schools to at least give you a chance. And what does the left do? They say, that's cruel, that's racist, that's bigoted. You've got to break that first. There's nothing compassionate about trapping somebody in a cycle of poverty because you don't think that they can accomplish anything. And there's nothing worse that you can do for a young person than to say, hey, you'll never accomplish anything because the whole world's out to get you. And there's a patriarchy, and there's a white supremacy, and there are these structures. You can't do anything, so just sit down and shut up. There's nothing worse that you can tell a young person. And if you can show people how cruel that is, then I think only at that point can you start making arguments based on policies, based on all of those data over the years, and then we win. Yeah, great question.
He skillfully addressed the student's question in a professional way, providing clear, factual insights on the left's tactics. He spoke calmly with respect, making complex issues more understandable.